assessora alle pari opportunità del Comune di Forlì e ho l'onore di portare i saluti istituzionali per questa mattinata di lavoro che si annuncia straordinaria e molto molto interessante. 900 Fest per il Comune di Forlì è in assoluto una delle manifestazioni più importanti a cui è venuto il Comune di Forlì da sostegno e c'è un dialogo aperto, continuo, e l'incontro di questa mattina è frutto evidentemente di una collaborazione e di un rapporto che è partito, si è instaurato nel dicembre dell'anno scorso, quando insieme a Raffaella Baccolini, che è membro del direttivo dell'associazione Women, di cui anch'io faccio parte, abbiamo realizzato un convegno sul tema dei diritti civili delle donne prima di tutto. E lì appunto avevamo invitato la dottoressa Patel, che purtroppo non è riuscita a esserci, ma con noi c'erano altri esponenti del suo gruppo, del Black All Soul Sister, e abbiamo avuto l'opportunità di discutere sui diritti civili delle donne attraverso un dialogo internazionale, proprio esattamente come oggi. E in questa iniziativa, proprio in dicembre dell'anno scorso, abbiamo collaborato con Fondazione Levi, che ci ha aiutato nella realizzazione degli atti di questo convegno e sarà protagonista insieme a noi al prossimo convegno che si terrà il 4 dicembre e sarà sostanzialmente un'evoluzione della riflessione che nelle giornate del 2017 si è sviluppata e che anche in questo appuntamento del 900 Fest evidentemente prende corpo e dà sostanza. Credo che questa continuità di dialogo, di confronto su questi temi sia molto preziosa, proprio perché oggi in questo Paese purtroppo la riflessione sul tema delle donne e i diritti civili è abbastanza, rilevo essere abbastanza lumicino, non so se il pubblico è d'accordo con me, e nella nostra piccola realtà, nella città di Forlì comunque, ci siamo assunti la responsabilità di provare a sfidare questo confronto e cercare di riflettere in modo nuovo, trasversale, su tematiche veramente complicate, che sono alla base anche del progetto dell'integrazione, che per noi è un progetto di sviluppo, un progetto di crescita della comunità. Io sono onoratissima quindi di portare i saluti, come dicevo, non solo miei ma dell'amministrazione della città di Forlì. Sono molto contenta di poter sedermi e ascoltare, e naturalmente ringrazio tutte le ospiti, Raffaella Baccolini, che oltre ad essere un punto di riferimento per la città è anche un'amica, il 900 Fest, le donne del 900 Fest, che sono praticamente tutte, quindi perché il 900 Fest è al femminile, e ovviamente tutte coloro che hanno deciso di essere qua questa mattina. Grazie davvero.
Grazie Lisa. Okay, I'll switch to English for our guests here this morning. So I'd like to thank the organizer of Novecento Fest for inviting me to chair this session this morning, but most of all for choosing this topic that I think is extremely timely and compelling. This morning's debate, as you know, concerns the intersection of racism and sexism, because as it is becoming increasingly clear, they are interconnected and they must be fought against simultaneously. We can't work on gender discrimination without also taking into consideration racial and economic inequality. As feminists, we must recognize the ties between misogyny and fascism, violence, racism, and the hatred that are characterizing our time are also an issue that we women must face. Racism, misogyny, and fascism rest on a culture that hierarchically differentiates between men and women based on their genders, races, sexual orientations, abilities, religion, etc. As Toni Morrison says in this fairly new book, The Origin of Others, racism is about the creation of others and the erection of fences. So today's topic is extremely timely, as I said. Especially today in a Europe, or really in a world, think of the United States, Brazil, where racism and fascism are gaining ground and feeding official and individual rage. and most countries seem to surrender to the populist discourse and violence against immigrants. And it is no coincidence that as walls are invoked and built, the rights and freedom of women, especially their reproductive rights, are also attacked. Since our speakers today come from the United Kingdom, Hungary, and Poland, allow me to say a few things about the situation in Italy, for two reasons: as a way of introducing the topic, but also as a way to recognize the problems at home, a way to take responsibility for the work that needs to be done in our country. And I'd like to thank Beatrice Spallaccia, whose work on misogynist hate speech provided the basis for these notes. At the end of July 2018, the journalist Luigi Mastrodonato created an interactive map that lists all the racist attacks reported in Italy since the establishment of our new government. In his research, Mastrodonato used data from the National Anti-Racial Discrimination Office and the Observatory for Security Against Discriminatory Acts of the Criminal Police. Mastrodonato identified in our country well over 30 attacks on migrants or people of foreign origins, reporting them on an interactive map. The map shows that 13 of these attacks were carried out with firearms and BB guns, actually some of them even here in Forlì. And in 2 cases, 2 people died, one in Aprilia and one in the province of Vibo Valentia, where Sacco Sumela, a Malian activist that regularly resided in Italy, lost his life. Among the attacks of July, there were also one in Rome, where an Italian shot a Roma girl in the back, and one near Turin against Daisy Osakwe, an Italian national athlete of Nigerian origin. The map produced by Mastrodonato, therefore, shows for the period from June 1st to July 30th, so 2 months, an average of 1 attack every 2 days, obviously counting only those that were reported. I'm sure that there were many more that were not reported. Despite the number of attacks and the various episodes of racism that have affected Italy in the past months, the government, and in particular our Minister of the Internal Affairs, Matteo Salvini, denied that there has been an escalation of racism. At the end of July, after the attack on Osakwe, Salvini himself declared, "A racism emergency in Italy? That's nonsense." As Mastrodonato's map shows, and as the journalist states, racism is not an invention. Rather, it is a phenomenon that informs a broader social and cultural discourse. The cases reported by Mastrodonato are only some of the most recent on the Italian territory. The number of racist attacks has been increasing for a decade, as in other Western countries. The same goes for France, the United States, and the United Kingdom. Among the most recent and infamous cases in Italy, there is the racist raid in Macerata of February 2018. The raid took place following the discovery, also in Macerata, of the body of a young woman, Pamela Mastropietro, who was brutally killed and for whose death a Nigerian pusher was blamed. On that occasion, Luca Traini, an Italian neo-fascist, fired from his car and injured 6 people, all Africans. He claimed to have acted in order to stop the growing phenomenon of drug dealing due to immigration. This episode in particular shows the direct link between racist and neo-fascist ideology. After the shooting, in fact, Traini wrapped himself in the Italian flag and outstretched his arm in the Roman salute. In the reports of crimes involving migrants, the origin of the attackers often seems to give rise to different treatment by the press. In fact, many are the examples of femicides and of rapes that are treated differently by newspapers, depending on the nationality of the attackers. For instance, the language used to narrate 2 attacks that took place in the summer of 2017 was very different. The 2 cases were the one in Rimini against a couple of Polish tourists and a transgender woman by 3 North Africans, and the rape of 2 American students in Florence by 2 Italian carabinieri. Although both were instances of rapes, in the first episode, newspapers emphasized above all the origin of the rapists and the brutality of the violence, without any respect for the victims. While in the second, The press used undoubtedly milder tones to condemn the aggression, even going as far as to question the story and the credibility of the young women. Regardless of their connection with stereotyped and racist representations, gender hate crimes against women continue to increase in Italy. In the first 6 months of 2018, 44 women were killed, 30% more than in the same period in 2017. In almost all cases, husbands, partners, or former partners were responsible for the killings, as they were unable to accept the end of the relationship or their partner's intention to start their lives anew. The figures on rape and violence reported in the same period are even higher. In the first 6 months of 2018, more than 2,300 cases of sexual violence were reported, an alarming figure, even though slightly lower compared to the same period in 2017, but showing nonetheless widespread violence both among Italians and in foreign communities. There are also increasing cases of violence following online grooming. The recent case of a man in Parma who kidnapped and raped for hours a young woman lured online shows how the net has become a new tool to perpetrate gender violence, updating the old paradigm of aggression against women. In fact, the internet can be an unsafe space for women who are constantly exposed also to verbal aggression. According to a recent survey by Vox, the Italian Observatory on Rights, which conducted a quantitative analysis of online hate speech in Italy, it is precisely against women that most messages are targeted, especially when media report cases of femicide or sexual harassment, for example, during the Weinstein case or after Trump's sexist tweets. There's an upsurge of this hate speech. In the 2015 study, out of 1,800,000 tweets collected, more than half are against women. Vox's data also shows the coexistence of various forms of hate speech. Along with misogyny, we find racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and homophobia. Even for these types of hatred, most derogatory tweets are unleashed at times when media report news about minorities and rights. In the case of homophobic tweets, for example, there have been recent upsurges when Germany approved gay marriage, and when in Naples, a mother kicked her son out of the house when he turned 18 because he was gay. Together with misogyny and racism, in fact, homophobia is a form of pervasive hatred in Italy, not only online. There have been many cases of homophobic attacks recorded on Italian territory. One of the most recent is the aggression against a gay couple, with the launch of gasoline and homophobic fascist graffiti, hinting at putting fags in gas chambers at their home in the province of Verona, a city where the wind of intolerance and backlash against women's rights is increasingly strong, as demonstrated by the recent approval of an anti-abortion motion. To conclude, racism and sexism rest on feelings of superiority. They are forms of discrimination that seek to crush men and women because of their race or gender, at times because of their race and gender. I'm not here to identify possible solutions, obviously, but because racism and sexism mean preventing the creation of a common humanity, against them and against their rise in these difficult times, we must form alliances and work for solidarity. As scholars, it possibly means adopting an intersectional approach. As activists, it may mean adopting an inclusive political practice that breaks down divisions of gender, race, and class. Let me conclude with a quote from one of our speakers, Pragna Patel, which I found particularly illuminating. I aspire to socialism, not the socialisms that have existed around the world, but one infused with humanity, decency, justice, empathy, and compassion. At the heart of it is the idea that human beings are to be intrinsically valued, that we can all coexist through mutual respect and rights. A politics of hope and not hate. If we have hope, we can dream about the possibilities. Thank you. first speaker is Wanda Nowicka, who is a Polish politician and activist who has served as Deputy Marshal of the Polish Parliament from 2011 to 2015. She's been a teacher of Latin and English from 1985 to 1993, and in 1990 she co-founded Neutral, okay, the Association of State Neutrality, an organization focused on the separation of church and state in Polish politics. She was also one of the founders of the Federation for Women and Family Planning in 1992, a non-governmental organization that combined Neutral and 4 other organizations. I'll give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Raffaella, for this kind introduction and also for this very comprehensive frame for our debate today. Good morning, everybody. I'm really honored and happy to be here at this important conference, which is extremely relevant for all of us here in Europe, for many reasons, and also, first of all, for those threats we are all experiencing with revival of nationalisms, neo-fascism, and all negative trends. Also because of his historical moments. For you, 1938 is a very important date, and of rising fascism in Italy. For us, this is 100 years of Polish independence. We are going to celebrate in 1 month. I'm going to speak more about that in my presentation. And also because of the future, we are facing the elections to the European Parliament next May, which are going to be crucial for deciding in which direction the entire Europe will go regarding these issues of our concern. So my presentation is focusing on women's struggle against fascism and sexism, and I will going to cover, of course, in a short version, I hope, 3 main topics. One, this is the issue of reproductive rights in Poland, which is a big battle which is taking place every day since for the last 30 years. Secondly, I'm going to speak about the issue of violence against women and about state policies regarding that. And then I will concentrate on the issue of women engagement and struggle against fascism and all those negative movements. Let me just mention that why I picked up those 30 years, because 30 years ago, more or less 30 years ago, 29 years ago, Poland joined, Poland went through political transformation, as a result of which we have become a democratic state with the rule of law. Poland has become the country which started this process of European transformation. Third, you had Berlin Wall collapse and things like that. So we started some democratic changes in our part of the world, I mean, which was behind the Iron Curtain. So it is important, so this is a very important threshold in our history. And these political changes, which many of us, myself included, were looking forward to and have been engaged in and implementing democratic state, also brought some negative consequences for women, because at that time negative phenomena such as revival of patriarchy, misogyny, and control of women's lives and bodies have become the reality of Polish women. So this is really a paradox of women's history in Poland. Then once we regain freedom and democracy, in the same time the revival of those negative trends which are trying to, which in fact resulted in taking away from women their control over their bodies, have become the reality. And since then, Polish women have been fighting against those policies. So some other changes that took place, or maybe not changes, but some problems we are facing. This is the role of the Roman Catholic Church in Poland. It is extremely powerful, and at that time, in particular, when the Polish Pope was coming every other year to Poland to preach the parliamentarians to introduce repressive anti-abortion law. So this is something which really played a big role in our history, and is still playing, because the Catholic Church is a real political player in the scene. And the state policies that have been introduced, as I mentioned, have also to do with revival or reintroduction of traditional roles of women in the society. So, for example, they started with closing creches, kindergartens, pushing women from the labor market into their homes to look after children, and so on. So that was really, I would say, some revolution, or we could say cultural war we were facing. Cultural war which was specifically against women. And one more thing I would like to mention here is also that the state has become an important player against women's rights. It was not like the state is a neutral implementer of policies, but they, together with the church, with other fundamentalist movement, they really introduced policies or did not implement policies that should be implemented, for example, as far as the issue of violence is concerned. So the state, as we say, abandoned women, that really betrayed women, has become, is not really using their power, their resources to look after good legislation and good policies, but rather being a side which really are harmful to Polish women. Let me move into my first topic, which is reproductive rights war. So this is the war that started the earliest, I would say, at the earliest moment in our history. And just briefly, because this is a long story, and I've been one of the key players as a founder and leader of the organization, the Federation for Women and Family Planning, to first try to stop the restrictions on abortion in Poland, and later to try to withdraw those restrictions once they had been implemented in 1993. Maybe just for your for the historical context, which probably you are not aware of. Poland was the second country in the world which introduced some legal conditions for abortion in 1932. So it was the second after Russia. It was completely not connected with Russia, but in Russia, Stalin implemented the ban on abortion that was started in Russia, abortion was legalized in 1920, and then Stalin in 1936 again introduced restrictions on abortion to Russian women. And Poland, so for a short moment, since 32, was the only country we had, at least as I'm aware of, which had some legislation which allowed legally for abortion on certain conditions. Activists at that time did not succeed to have abortion on social ground, but they had on medical ground and criminal grounds. So we have tradition of legal abortion, and then after the World War II, abortion was legalized in 1956. So that's why when I'm saying about this political change, when all of a sudden this revival of this anti-abortion rhetoric and push has started, for many of us, like myself, it was a big shock. How you can, and we even didn't believe it is possible that they can really introduce the legislation on which we thought this is the past that is really past and should be completely forgotten. But that shows that there are not gains women have that are forever. You always have to be watchful, and you always have to protect, because you can easily lose them. So now speaking about the years, the 90s, because all this happened in the 90s, there have been a number of attempts to liberalize that law, which has been introduced, which basically banned abortion on social ground. But since in 21st century, another change has happened, because then these anti-women movements, religious fundamentalism, nationalists, all kinds of those guys who believe that women should be controlled in all aspects of their life, including reproduction and sexuality, they started to push on full ban of abortion. So in the 21st century, there is a even bigger war. There have been many attempts to pass the law which would introduce the full ban on abortion or introduce some restrictions, and they have been rejected. But this war has really strengthened its power once the new regime became a ruling party in Poland. I mean the Law and Justice. This is the party which entered into power in 2015, and since that they are really trying to destroy our democracy and are introducing policies against all segments, many segments of the society, particularly against women. In this struggle for reproductive rights, one of the dates that have been extremely important, this is 2016, because at that time there was this law in Parliament to introduce full ban on abortion. And at that time, women went out into streets. Massive informal movements of women went out in the streets, and there is even important date for this. This is October the 3rd, 2016, which in fact women succeeded to stop the draft legislation that was pending in Parliament of full ban of abortion. It seems that the leader of the ruling party, Jarosław Kaczyński, really understood that he cannot go that far at that moment, so this law that has been proposed in Parliament was rejected. But of course, this is not the end of the story, because these movements, anti-women movements, are also very powerful lobbyists, and they push Kaczyński and his party to introduce those restrictions to women's rights. So currently in Parliament there are two provisions which are pending. We don't know what will happen with them, but they might be passed. One is the law of restricting abortion on genetic grounds. So remove this condition, so when the fetus is badly deformed, which is still theoretically speaking legal, although not much practiced by doctors due to conscience clause, which is a big problem. I know you have this problem here as well. But legally speaking, it is still in law. So the law is pending in Parliament, in the Commission, so it can be, like one day like this, it can be put to the plenary and it could be passed. Another legislation, another even worse legal opportunity to ban abortion is a claim to Constitutional Court, which since Constitutional Court has been completely taken over by the ruling regime, so if they decided to discuss this, they might decide that abortion on genetic grounds or abortion at all is unconstitutional, which would be, of course, completely not in accordance with the constitution, with Polish constitution, but with those people who we now have at the Constitutional Court, it is quite possible. So, the truth is that that we are that the war is, it is in process. We are having parliamentary elections in 1 year, and that depends on the politics of the ruling party, if they decide to discuss that or they decide not to do this, depending on the opinion polls. So that's something to see. But good side of it, as I mentioned already, that women's, as you could see from these pictures, really, this is a new quality of women's movement. In the 90s, there were primarily a couple of women's organizations. We've done a lot of actions and also street actions, but also a lot of advocacy, going to international courts and things like that. Nothing really worked, but it was not such a massive movement. But now this movement has started. This is a different kind of a movement. It is not like, very formalized. It is basically called like women's strike or black protest. But thanks to Facebook and other social media, we, part of that we can easily mobilize one day that you have to be there and everybody is there. And of course many men, supportive men, are with us on that. So this is not the end of the story. I don't know how it will end up. I hope it will. The abortion ban is not going to be passed, and of course, in longer run, I hope that women in Poland regain their right to decide about their reproduction. Now I will move to the issue of violence against women. Here we face a different problem. It is not that Polish state has introduced a special law against women. It's not that. This is more like unwillingness to undertake any action on that. So women groups and some other players have been pushing for long to introduce some legislation. After many years, some legislation has been put in place, but of course it is not sufficient. It doesn't really seriously protect women against violence, and also is not prevent the violence in future. In this case, I would like to mention a couple of examples of women's struggles on that issue. A couple of years ago, when I was in Parliament, but disconnected with the fact that I was in Parliament, but then I had different tools to be engaged. There was a big issue of ratifying the European Convention Against Violence. And who would think that it can be controversial? It seems that everyone is against violence and violence against women. But it turned out not. That for all these movements, as we mentioned before, this is somehow threatening, that introducing of anti-violence strong policies is threatening the patriarchal, the current status of the society, of family, and that's what they are afraid of. They want this family remain in the current situation, which is not based on equality, on partnership, on the right to decide about yourself. So we fought, and when I speak we, I mean women's movement in particular, although I was in Parliament with very small left-oriented party, which of course was in opposition, and very few of us were active on that subject in Parliament. But women's movement, of which I'm part of it, have done a number of actions and initiatives to ratify the convention. And it was in the former Parliament, which was not that drastically, extremely right-wing like the one we are having now, but it's a right-wing government who was afraid of all this pressure they've been experiencing as well from the church, from all these other movements and so on. So that's why it took so long to ratify the convention. So Poland has ratified the convention eventually at the very last moment of the last term of Parliament. However, it has never been implemented at that time, and of course it's not implemented now. Moreover, you hear from time to time that this current government is considering withdrawing their signature after the convention. So that shows very clearly what they think about that. In the same time, they dare to say that they are very much anti-violence against women, and they've been using this issue instrumentally in their anti-immigration policies. For example, when the Polish government is extremely anti-immigration and anti-refugee, doesn't want to join EU policies on that subject, so they've been using the argument, we have to protect Polish women against being raped by those aliens that may come. So this is very nasty argument, because of course feminists were saying, why don't you protect first Polish women against violence here by Polish males, start with that. But it doesn't work. I mean, this xenophobic policies are being very, very strong in Poland, and women are being used instrumentally. I mean, the issue of violence against women is being used as instrument to strengthen the perspective on those policies. And recently, I don't know how much you are following Polish politics. Polish President Andrzej Duda recently was visiting Germany, where he had a number of very weird, really terrible statements. And one of those, when the German president has asked President Duda, Polish president, about the censorship in Poland, because this is a problem, that one of the things that happened under current regime, this complete censorship of messages in public media. He said, if Polish woman is being raped, that is publicized broadly by the media. Of course, it was the allusion to this German rapes that that has been later, that happened a couple of years ago, and so on. But again, he used women. That so he's so protective of Polish women. In the same time, he said that not at this meeting, that the convention should be withdrawn. So this is completely unacceptable, and I really miss words, and also English words in particular, to describe this in the way I should. And so violence. So it is. I mean, this is a big problem. At the same time, women are more and more in the streets. They engage in 1 billion rising actions on top of other actions they do on everyday basis, which are probably depoliticized. They are not that visible, like struggle for shelters that have been closed and other things. But a lot of work is being done on the grassroots level. But in the same time, this engagement is quite visible in Poland. So now, so that was still okay. So that was still. So I will move now to women against fascism. I mean, this is another dimension of women's struggles, because so far I was speaking about issues which are specifically, which are targeting women specifically. But of course, women have been always engaged in actions, in other movements like peace movements and others. So they have been active, not necessarily as women, with like specific women's agenda, but we've been everywhere, let's say. However, at this time, at this moment of our history, we are experiencing a very strong engagement of a group of women which are in informal group called Women Against Fascism, which are engaged for last 2 years. And here I have like 2 presentations. One, I will continue mine, and then since I'm in touch with them, and they were happy to know that I'm coming to the event like this, so they given me her presentation. So please allow me also to present presentation, which I think will give you more information on what's happening in Poland. So, and I try not to be that too long. I don't know how much time. No. Anyway, okay. So as I mentioned, about our 100th anniversary of our independence, because we regained independence in 1918, and this big moment of our history has been taken over by nationalists, xenophobic movements, which every year are organizing on the November 11th big demonstrations with flares, with violence, with xenophobic slogans, and they take over Warsaw. And that hasn't started right now, but the change is that the current government is tolerating those movements, and now they are growing bigger and bigger. So this group, Women Against Fascism, has started their activities, and you can see some of the slides from my PowerPoint. But now I will move to their PowerPoint. Where is this? I don't know if the cursor doesn't move. No, it's off. I'm sorry. Do you want to exit this? I want this to put no, but the cursor is here. Okay. 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 And let me start with this presentation prepared by this group of women. So anyways, as I said, they started their activities because of this, first of all, of this growing fascist, neo-fascist, nationalistic movement, and also these demonstrations that take over Warsaw are ignored or tolerated by the current government, so they started their actions. So these are these neo-Nazis going in the middle of Warsaw on one of these occasions. These women started actions in August 2017, wearing black, and they started to block those fascist demonstrations, but the main of those demonstrations, the main event of those demonstrations is this 11 November, so there are some other actions. I'm not going into this. They decided to go in the middle of this very dangerous crowd of people with their slogan, Women Against Fascism. So you have Women Against Fascism. They go into that, and this is how it looks like. I mean, this nationalistic movement. This is the main bridge in Warsaw. When you can see those flares, I mean, this is the whole city is completely paralyzed. Who can leaves the place because it's really dangerous. But these women decided to struggle against them. So these are these actions when they go with their slogans. So they experienced a lot of violence oh, sorry, I don't know what I did. Okay. What's happened to this one? I don't know, something happened. So, why it is not, I don't know why.
There's a white page. Keep going.
No, it seems it doesn't show at all. So anyway, I'm so sorry because they asked me to present this to you, but let me just come back to my presentation then, because they has been treated terribly, and by the marchers themselves, but also by the police. I mean, the police is basically there to protect this march. So they've been violently taken away, as you could see. And when they pressed charges against marchers, what happened? The legal the law enforcement decided that this is not something that the prosecutor should be paying attention to, so just rejected their case against the marchers. Moreover, what happened? These women have been challenged by the police. And they have been convicted of paying fines for disrupting this official march. So for us now, the bigger question is what will happen now? Because, as I said, on November 11th, 2018, we are having 100th anniversary of our independence. The President Duda, this guy I was telling you about before, he invited those marchers to collaborate with him on the organizing official celebration of this anniversary. So these people, some of them, they are now, with this new term of parliament, they are in parliament, some of them. So, you know, this is really scary. They are in parliament, they have support of president, the police is tolerating their actions and takes actions against women. So this is the serious moment where we are now. So just at the very end, that problem has been notified by the Special Rapporteur on Cultural Rights of the United Nations. Padna has known her, Karima Banune, who a couple of weeks ago, she was on mission in Poland to check what's, on these problems related to culture, how they look like. And she wrote specifically about women, about the issue of women against fascism. So if you allow me, I will read it quickly. So the Special Rapporteur was sorry to hear reports that past events on the date that have been expressions of hate speech and extremism, and that a group of women counter-protesters calling themselves Women Against Fascism, who opposed this, were assaulted by participants of the 11 November 17 March. She heard concerns that this year this event may again be used by some extremist and nationalist forces to divide the population and could be the scene of renewed violence against, for example, those peacefully expressing their right to assemble and protest. This fear is magnified by the fact that charges against those who harmed women against fascism, counter-protesters, last year were dropped, and these women themselves are now facing fines. So it's good that the UN has notified that, but of course it doesn't stop things in Poland. So in my conclusion, just I briefly would like to say that where we are now. So I am afraid that the situation is getting worse and worse every day, and I don't see much hope for the quick change. Due to all undemocratic changes that happen in the country, which I can't speak much about, but some of you might have heard that we are not anymore a democratic society in full terms. We are sort of, we are authoritarian regime, moving towards, I would even say, totalitarian state. I hope it won't happen, but that's the reality. So women, although constantly have to fight for women's rights, gender equality, they increasingly have to engage in struggles for democracy, in expressing themselves to serious risks. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a scary, I think, report of the situation, which unfortunately I think is not isolated. So our second speaker is Pragna Patel, who is director of Southall Black Sisters and a founding member of Women Against Fundamentalism. The Southall Black Sister is an anti-racist and secular organization which was established in 1979 in London by Black and Asian women, which among other things last year was responsible for the historic ruling by the London Court of Appeal condemning an Islamic school in Birmingham for discrimination as it practiced a strict separation between boys and girls.
Thank you very much. So, thank you so much, Raffaella and Wanda, for an amazing framing of what it is that we are currently facing. I'm really invited and honored to be here. I think this is such a significant festival and such an important moment in all our political lives. I've been asked to talk about my work in addressing racism and sexism in the UK. And I would like to state at the outset that this has involved a challenge on our part in trying to create a progressive politics that is simultaneously feminist, anti-racist, secular, and anti-fundamentalist. I will elaborate on what I mean by all this with reference to the work and analysis of my organisation, Southall Black Sisters, which is an NGO for black and minority women based in West London. I guess I chose to look at events in the UK from our particular perspective because I want to try and trace our political journey from our beginnings and what I saw as a politics of hope to the current situation where I don't want to let go of hope, but I do feel that we are in crisis worldwide. And in relation to that, I want to start by saying that we are living in truly tumultuous and quite chilling times. Events across Europe, the US, and indeed throughout the world has shown that there is a darker, more sinister politics of hatred, intolerance, and violence at play, and it is becoming normalized. It is a politics that is driven by fear of the other, and it holds sways as governments themselves become complicit in, if not drivers of this new regressive politics of terror and censorship. And I think Wanda actually illustrated that really powerfully. We are witness to a worldwide rejection of secular, democratic and human rights values that were established in the aftermath of the Second World War. We've seen the global rise of the far right, but also the religious right, in the form of nationalism, religious fundamentalism and extremism. And we've also witnessed the rise of state authoritarianism, racism, anti-immigration hostility, the destruction of the environment, and the triumph of unbridled free market capitalism and neoliberalism. In Europe, the far right denounced multiculturalism, immigrants, and Muslims. whilst the religious right denounce so-called Western values, feminism, and others who do not subscribe to their rigid and austere worldview. Both are reactionary forces. Both reject modernity while themselves utilizing quite modern technologies. Both seek a return to an imaginary utopian religious or nationalist past based on a perceived crisis of morality. Both rely on violence, fear, and hatred as key weapons of control and annihilation. They deny our shared common humanity and values of diversity, pluralism, tolerance, compassion, and individual freedom, and instead both pursue murderous politics of division, ethnic or religious cleansing, and even genocide. The UK is not immune to any of this. It is currently dominated by the politics of Brexit, leading to much soul-searching amongst the left as to what lay behind the Brexit vote. Some say it was a response to austerity. Others say it was a backlash against liberalism and the metropolitan elitism of the political classes. And yet others say that it was an anti-establishment vote by the white working classes, who are disenfranchised and left behind. Whatever the motivations, and they're likely to be all of these things and more, the one thing we can be sure about is that it has provided the context for the assertion of a nationalist identity based on parochialism, xenophobia, and racism, promoted by right-wing and far-right fascist insurgents. This was signified most clearly in the assassination of the Labour MP Jo Cox in 2016, who defended the rights of refugees and immigrants. She was killed by a far-right extremist who believed that he was engaged, in his words, a long and bloody struggle for white supremacy. So this is the current socio-political context in which organizations like mine have found ourselves in. We actually began our lives in the 1970s under the all-consuming shadow of Thatcherism, which was characterized by rampant capitalism. We were also at the same time a child of the resurgent second wave of feminism and of the burgeoning anti-racist movement. The 1970s in the UK was a period of mass anti-racist mobilizations led by a younger generation of black, by which I mean African, Caribbean and South Asian, who happen to be the largest diasporic communities in the UK. The anti-racist mobilizations were led by black and Asian men and women. And in 1979 in Southall, we found ourselves in the midst of a racial uprising that involved community mobilization supported by many anti-racists to prevent the then fascist organization, the National Front, now that has been superseded by the British National Party. The National Front was seeking to march through Southall, indeed did march through Southall and held a meeting in Southall, which was perceived to be an act of pure provocation and intimidation by the largely South Asian community. As in other parts of the UK, the community demonstrated against the National Front and against racism. And by doing so, the protest shined a light not just on street level racism and the far right, so not just on the fascist thugs, but also on the reality of institutional racism within the police force itself. So the Southall protests, for example, did not lead to a single arrest of the white fascist youths who were marching in quite progressive, aggressive and hostile manner, but it led to the criminalization of over 300 mainly Asian and Afro-Caribbean youths who were involved in the anti-racist struggles. They were subject to police assaults and mass arrests and convictions. And in fact, their criminal trials were deliberately organized outside London so that the state could guarantee convictions from all white juries. The anti-racist protests also culminated in the murder of a white anti-racist activist Blair Peach. He was killed by police officers from specialist militarized police units that had undergone training in conflict areas such as Northern Ireland. So despite a campaign for accountability and justice, until now, no police officer has ever been held to account for his murder. Southall Black Sisters came out of that moment of anti-racist activity and defense of Southall. And in that moment, many Afro-Caribbean and South Asian women had participated in what were anti-racist, anti-fascist protests. However, these women went on to establish an autonomous black feminist group because of their frustration with the failure of the anti-racist movement to deal with the question of women's oppression. At the same time, we also sought to challenge the wider feminist movement for its failure to deal with the question of race. In doing so, Southall Black Sisters emerged as one of the first black feminist advocacy and campaigning groups in the UK to challenge both racism and sexism at one and the same time. Our very inception was an act of dissent, because, like any rebellious child, we charted our political journey towards an anti-racist feminism by both drawing from as well as challenging the orthodoxies of the movements from which we were born. We were as uncompromising, I would say we are as uncompromising on challenging gender inequality and patriarchal power from within as we are in challenging racism from without. For instance, in the 80s, we broke silence around issues of domestic violence and domestic violence-related murders and suicides of South Asian women in Southall and elsewhere. Unlike the race mobilizations in Southall in 1979, born out of anger and indignation, the same minority community responded to the atrocities committed against women with silence. By mobilizing around domestic violence and gender inequality, we set ourselves not only against the community traditionalists and religious conservatives who sought to subjugate women through the maintenance of patriarchal status quo, but we also found ourselves setting ourselves against aspects of anti-racism that lapsed into narrow and essentialist identity politics that denied other power relations and inequality born out of, for example, religious caste and gender divisions, and differential access to power within communities, not just across communities. In this way, our dissenting politics also broke with the anti-racist myth of community unity. Over the years, our feminist struggles and campaigns have, out of necessity, drawn on the routine experiences of the many women, black and minority women, who come to us with stories of violence and abuse, including more culturally specific forms of harm, such as honor-based violence, forced marriage, and so on. But our efforts from time to time have led to a backlash within our communities, which has threatened our very existence. For example, community leaders who also hold power in local authority and at national level have tried to close us down on the basis that we are trying to destroy the very religious and cultural fabric of our communities. They often accuse us or portray us as westernized feminists, outsiders, or homewreckers. And what they try to do is delegitimize, in effect, feminist voices and claim that feminism is somehow antithetical to community values and norms. Sadly, historically, the anti-racist left has also not been immune from making such accusations. When we raise concerns about domestic violence or the oppression of women, we are constantly accused of washing our dirty linen in public and of fueling racism and negative stereotypes of minority communities as backward or barbaric. Our response to such accusations is to argue that we cannot prioritize the anti-racist struggle at the expense of the feminist cause or at the expense of political expediency. We argue that black women's realities are as much shaped by gender inequality as by racism, and that subscribing to the view that there is a hierarchy of oppression is to collude in our own silence and oppression. So if I look back at the black feminism of the 70s and 80s, I would identify three particular aspects of feminist politics that we tried to forge, three positive aspects of the politics that we tried to create. Firstly, we tried to genuinely try to attempt to develop what is now referred to as intersectional analysis. That is, connecting race, gender, and class as a way of doing and thinking feminism. In the 80s, second wave of feminism as a political movement was in full swing on many fronts in the UK and other parts of Western Europe. There were campaigns for equal pay, better working conditions, the right to contraception and abortion, and shelters for victims of domestic violence. But as black feminists, we began to challenge the feminist movement for the lack of inclusion of black and minority women's experiences and voices. We forged a new kind of feminism that tried to show that processes of race, class, and gender intersected and had differential impact on women from different social and ethnic groups, both nationally and internationally. For example, we challenge feminist understandings of the family and the state by demanding the need to also look at the impact of racist immigration and nationality laws, and practices such as the virginity testing of Asian women that were being carried out by UK immigration officers. We challenged oppressive police stop and search practices aimed particularly at black male youth. We challenged practices of forced sterilization of black women in the global south, and so on. We argued that these were also political priorities for feminism, and that analysis of these experiences provided a very different perspective on the state's relationship with women and the institution of the family. We argued that in certain contexts, the family, in relation to black women's experiences, was simultaneously patriarchal, but it also, at certain moments, provided a bulwark against oppressive state intrusion and racism, manifested in, for example, harsh anti-family reunification measures in immigration laws. I don't want to paint a romantic picture of black feminism in the 70s and 80s, because amongst black women there were also contestations and differences relating to different political perspectives. But at the same time, there was an attempt to forge an intersectional analysis, examining the links between systems of oppression based on sexuality, race, class, and gender. Our aim was to show how systems of oppression and exploitation do not simply sit side by side, but are mutually constituted. Identity markers, for example, female and black, do not exist independently of each other. Each informs the other, often creating a complex convergence of oppression that is more heightened than that created by a single strand of discrimination. So although we were practicing a politics of intersectionality, the term was actually coined by the American feminist legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, who drew on the experiences of black American women in the workplace. Crenshaw argued that in order to understand the oppression of black women, it is necessary to look at the intersection of blackness and womanhood. Understanding intersectionality is essential to combating the interwoven prejudices and inequalities that people face in their daily lives. So intersectional analysis was critical to our kind of feminism. But the second important aspect was we mobilized behind the term black, because we saw this as a secular and unifying identity, inclusive of all histories of colonialism, racial inequality, and racism. Until the late 80s, many African, Caribbean, South Asians in the anti-racist movements mobilized under the term black, which was seen as a political identity. And that in turn was borrowed heavily from the American Civil Rights Movement. And of course, the term black identity did not go uncontested. Not every black or Asian accepted it. But within anti-racist circles, it was generally accepted as a secular and non-sectarian identity, with a focus very much on unity in struggles against racism across class, caste, religion, and ethnicity. But in recent times, this has become incredibly difficult to retain the notion of the black identity. Why? Because we are now swimming against the currents of religious fundamentalism and regressive religious identity politics. And it is a politics that is exclusive of other experiences. I believe that it is all the more important to hang on to the term black because the adoption of that identity had allowed for the possibility of coalition building and alliances between and within different groups. And it allowed for the possibility to locate ourselves in wider movements for social justice. And it was that perspective that in the 80s led us to support a range of other struggles. For example, in the 80s, we were part of black delegations to Northern Ireland and to Palestine and to mining communities during the Great Miners' Strike in 1984. These were all genuine attempts to build a politics of solidarity across difference by trying to forge alliances with other progressive social movements. We tried to bridge the gap between anti-racism, feminism, and socialist left or progressive politics. The third part of our feminism that was critical to us was that we linked our feminism to a critique of official multiculturalism. And we made it possible to challenge culturally relativist approaches adopted by the British state to issues of gender inequality within black and minority communities. The history of Southall Black Sisters is in fact inextricably bound up with challenging aspects of official multiculturalism, which in fact has its root in colonial practices. Since the mid-80s, multiculturalism has been the dominant social approach to race relations between the state and minority communities in the UK. It was first introduced in education and quickly accepted as a tool of national policy across a number of areas. Prior to the 70s, the initial focus of British race relations policy was on assimilation into the so-called British way of life, and it was based on the idea that good race relations can only be achieved if minorities shared all aspects of their religious and cultural identities. But this kind of very regressive notion of assimilation gave way to a more enlightened form of multiculturalism, which actually valued the need for tolerance and respect for difference. And to that extent, it was useful, and it is useful in the struggle against racism. However, the problem with multiculturalism is not the fact of multiculturalism. I believe all societies are enhanced by being multicultural. But it was hindered by the notion, the state's notion of what constituted multiculturalism, because the official policy of multiculturalism only recognized diversity, and diversity was seen as an end in itself, not as a goal to something else, not as a goal to equality, but as an end in itself. So when it was divested of the goal towards equality, it becomes a way of only recognizing difference and tolerating difference. So in practice, it was stripped of its kind of progressive elements. But in the 80s, we began to challenge this official model of multiculturalism because we were concerned by the ways in multiculturalism, under the multicultural model, minority communities were constructed as homogeneous, monolithic entities without any internal divisions based on class, caste, age, gender, and so on. And the model then provided space for community leaderships to emerge. And those leaderships, or community representatives or mediators, were usually men from religious backgrounds and business classes. And they acted as mediators between the state and minority communities. They developed the social contract. And those social contracts were conservative. They did not include women's rights or the rights of other vulnerable subgroups in our communities. The reason why we challenged the multicultural model, apart from the fact that it created a very regressive kind of notion of minority communities, was because minority women were silenced within that model. And when faced with issues of domestic violence or forced marriage or rape or other forms of gender-based violence, the state's response was, the multicultural response was non-intervention in order to respect and tolerate cultural difference, religious differences. So in other words, in the name of cultural sensitivity, in the name of religious respect for religious sensibilities, issues of violence against women were unrecognized, were not recognized. So community interests were only defined by male community leaderships that maintained the patriarchal status quo. This meant that the state and community were colluding in maintaining the patriarchal systems that minority women were struggling against. And it laid the foundation for a culturally relativist approach to women's rights for minorities. It left us with no option but to challenge the multicultural model using the legal system, using equality laws, and using human rights standards and values. By 2000, as a result of incessant campaigning by groups like us and others, in relation to the state's failure to protect minority women in cases involving violence and so on, we began to see a shift in state policy. Following an official inquiry into the issue of forced marriage, for example, the government began to advocate a mature multicultural approach. Now that was a very progressive moment for us in minority communities because it signaled the view that violence against minority women should be treated no different to violence against women in the majority communities. And it signaled the view that minority women should be subject to a rights-based analysis and should be responded to using rights-based laws. So that was a very potentially liberating moment for us. But since then, and the significant advances we made, particularly in seeking concessions from the state, invoking human rights and equalities laws, we've now gone backwards. That was the moment, I would say, a high point in black feminist struggles in relation to gender-based violence, but we have now gone backwards. Over the last 2 decades or more, we found ourselves defending the gains that we have made because of the threats posed by the intersection of austerity with privatization, resurgent racism, nationalism, religious fundamentalism. The intersections of all these developments have generated a patriarchal, authoritarian and sectarian brand of politics that is contributing to deepening marginalization and inequality, and much more, it's contributing to a desecularization of politics and civic spaces, particularly in minority communities. And we are now in danger of seriously losing the gains and going backwards. There are 2 things that I really want to highlight in terms of why and how we are going backwards. The first is the British state's rhetoric on immigration and its enactment of draconian immigration policies. It has highlighted just how susceptible the political landscape has been to fear and scaremongering, in which immigration has been mercilessly used to garner votes. The state's policy is to create a hostile environment for immigrants, and that has seen a rise in hate crimes and made racism acceptable. The politics of Brexit has only served to amplify this process. Indeed, it is impossible to talk about immigration in public without simultaneously taking account of the rise of British nationalism and neoliberal imperatives, and the fear and resentment that immigration conjures in the population. We're really experiencing a new and uncharted chapter in immigration law and enforcement in the UK. And I believe this is true in the rest of Europe. National borders are becoming desegregated and dispersed in their policing and administration. And the proliferation of the border has given to new rise has given rise to new techniques of immigration enforcement and controlled and heightened anti-immigration sentiments. The immigration measures have made acceptable the view that one can be anti-immigration and talk in the language of those who belong and who do not belong, without appearing to be racist, whilst at the same time being profoundly racist. And that is the central paradox. It is now legitimate to talk of anti-racist immigration and to at the same time say, but you're not racist. We are seeing the merging of external and internal border controls. So the border controls are not just at the physical borders of the UK or Europe. They are now part of society. And so society is turning in on itself. What some of us refer to as everyday bordering. It's taking root and it is normalizing a politics of anti-immigration racism, which is dependent on surveillance and control involving all sections of society. So in the UK has passed a series of laws which demand that all sections of society, including those areas that have a paramount duty to protect vulnerable people, social services, the police in terms of protecting people against violence, are now performing immigration border functions. So what that means is that the institutional culture of even the welfare state is being subverted, and the humanitarian and welfare ethos of these institutions is being subverted. So those institutions providing health care, welfare assistance, and so on, are now checking for immigration and illegality rather than supporting people who are vulnerable. The immigration measures have also cut through communities, and they're undermining any attempt to create convivial civic spaces. So they're undermining any attempt in civic society to nurture an ethos based on equality, compassion, shared experiences, or humanitarian assistance and care. And I have to say, the rise of anti-immigration racism has been normalized, not only in the majority population, but even within minority communities, where different minority groups start pitting themselves against each other. Minorities are not immune to the racism and bigotry that is being whipped up. They draw clear lines between themselves as the more settled communities, and therefore deserving of rights, and the new migrants that are deemed not to belong. The other threat that I really want to highlight, and the way is not just the fact that anti-immigration culture has fragmented resistance, left resistance, anti-racist resistance to these right-wing and regressive developments, but the other threat to political resistance, left resistance, is the rise of religious identity politics. And that is fueled by the rise of religious fundamentalism, particularly in minority communities. So anti-racist struggles are splintered solidarity, and they've splintered the attempt that we made back in the 80s to have a more unified approach to racism. Religious identity politics poses a danger, not just to the struggles against racism, but for wider progressive struggles against social injustice and inequality, in particular gender inequality. We have seen the growth of religious fundamentalists and conservative identities influenced by increasingly transnational nature of Islamist politics. But this phenomenon is also mirrored in Hindu and Sikh diaspora populations in the UK. They're also similarly influenced and connected to resurgence, nationalist and fundamentalist movements in the Indian subcontinent. In India, we have a right-wing, I would say fascist leader in power at the moment, and he's come into power with a very nationalist fascist agenda. And that influences the diaspora in the UK. Similarly, Islamist politics influence diaspora in the UK. So we have to face many directions at the same time. And our challenge is not just to aspects of multiculturalism, but I would say we have moved away from multiculturalism. And we are now into an era of multi-faithism. And what I mean by that is that the state recognizes minority communities not as black or as even ethnics, the Indians or the Pakistanis or the African Caribbeans, but as religious entities, as the Hindus, as the Muslims, as the Sikhs, as the Christians. That is multi-faithism, and it is a policy that is also being promoted by the state. So I would argue that we have moved away from multiculturalism, and although we critiqued that politics for the reasons I've said, I now find myself in the paradoxical position of defending that, because what we have moved to is even more reactionary. Multi-faithism actually as a process began in the aftermath of the Salman Rushdie affair in 1989, when the Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran issued a fatwa because he wrote the book Satanic Verses. That led to the rise of religious Islamist politics in the UK amongst minority communities, particularly from Muslim backgrounds. But following quickly were others who also adopted a very regressive Sikh or Hindu identity. What the state has done by accepting multi-faithism as now the state policy is to address the needs of minorities through the prism of religion. The question is, who defines that religion? Who defines religious identity? Who defines minority needs based on religion? The forces that define it are fundamentalists and ultra-conservatives. And they define religious identity in very narrow ways, in very conservative ways, that actually are very detrimental to women's rights, to minority women's rights. So what we see is the state, on the one hand, denigrating minorities, moving away from multiculturalism, using the language of integration, by which they don't mean genuine integration, but by which they mean assimilation, intolerance towards minorities. Paradoxically, they've also adopted a faith-based approach to minorities, which only strengthens regressive religious leaderships. And the reason they've adopted the multi-faith approach is because of the war on terror. The war on terror means that the British state has had to deal with the question of extremism and fundamentalism. And they think that they can deal with that by creating moderate religious leaderships. But these religious leaderships are not moderate. They may be moderate in terms of not fomenting violence in the UK, but they have transnational links that are fundamentalists, that are fomenting violence abroad, and that are socially conservative on the question of gender. Yet the masks that these fundamentalists adopt is a very sophisticated mask. So in public they can use the language of anti-racism even, human rights, anti-discrimination discourse, all the while being profoundly reactionary. And multi-faithism, above and all else, is a process of desecularization of civic society. It has allowed the religious right, by which I mean the fundamentalists, the conservatives, and the so-called moderates, to come together and to penetrate all levels of society and to influence social policy and the law itself. And they carry this authoritarian agenda not just into institutions of the state, like the legal system or the political system or even at the cultural level, but they carry that authoritarian into left forums too and influence left anti-racist politics. They claim to be the authentic voice of the community that they claim to represent. So what are the key themes to emerge from this multi-faith desecularization process? Here are some of the key things that are developing in relation to minority communities. We've not had the chance to embed a human rights culture within our communities. Instead, multi-faithism is disrupting any attempt to create a progressive politics in the following ways. It's led to a growing communalization, by which I mean sectarianization of our communities. So we are no longer coming together as blacks, but we are opposing each other as Hindus and Muslims and Sikhs and so on. So the framing of minority needs and identities in accordance with religious identities, that's what I mean by the communalization of communities. And we see what happens. The logical end of that is what happened in Northern Ireland, when Protestants and Catholics were pitted against each other. We're also, secondly, seeing the normalization of a culture of blasphemy and censorship. So any attempt to dissent from within, feminist dissent, any anti-racist dissent that's based on democratic values is seen as blasphemous. And attempts are made to shut down and silence critics from within and to enforce through censorship. This leaves little or no space for secular progressive dissent from within. And from the 90s, we've seen with alarming frequency attempts made by Muslims, Christians, Hindus, and Sikh religious right to clamp down on non-conformity and impose a strict religious identity on followers, if necessary, by force and intimidation. So some of the examples I would give is the way Hindu fundamentalists in the UK have mobilized to prevent paintings and exhibitions, art exhibitions, that are seen to be somehow offending Hindu religious sensibilities that they are defining. We've seen Muslim fundamentalists clamping down on any kind of attempt to dissent from religious orthodoxies, and the fatwa on Salman Rushdie was one classic example. We have seen attempts made by Sikh fundamentalist youth who go into Sikh temples and disrupt interfaith marriages by force and intimidation, based on the idea that it is somehow tainting Sikh religious purity. And they all also fight each other and construct themselves in opposition to each other and inferiorize the other. We have also seen the growing accommodation of religious identity, reactionary religious identity, in public bodies. And this is linked to a socially conservative agenda and definitions of gender. What we're seeing is an environment that is fostered, that is reinvigorating patriarchy. It is reinvigorating a masculine, hyper-masculine identity amongst youth. And it is reinvigorating and radiating violence and fear. Women in particular are the targets of all fundamentalist movements. And they're targeted not only through changes through the law, for example, restricting reproductive rights and so on, but also through violence. They're literally targeted if they are seen to somehow transgress from traditional norms. And their lives and freedoms are restricted not just in the public sphere, but also in the private sphere, using violence and discrimination. And finally, we've seen the religious right make use of the vacuum that has been created by the neoliberal project on privatization, on austerity. So what happens, and this is certainly evident in the UK when the welfare state retreats, when the promise of the welfare state is reneged. So we're seeing a vacuum that is created. The welfare state is shrinking and shrinking. Cuts to social services, cuts to legal aid, cuts to welfare systems, which means that the safety net that the poor and vulnerable have is no longer there, or it's just tenuously there. What happens when that vacuum is created? Who steps into the vacuum? And in the UK, what is evident is that the religious right are stepping into that vacuum. And they are stepping into that vacuum because they have the networks, they have the resources to step into it in a way that the left does not. And when they step into that vacuum, they reorganize society. They impose a new social order. And that is what we're finding in the UK, the privatization of justice. and the religious right in the process have made use of this multi-faith space by demanding parallel legal systems based on religion. And so, for example, some of the campaigns that we have led are campaigns to prevent the religious right from establishing parallel legal systems based on religious values that discriminate against women, so-called Sharia courts, the use of Sharia laws. And it's not just Muslims, because we know that if they succeed, the Hindus and the Sikhs will follow and reinvent their own parallel legal systems. And those parallel legal systems exclude the formal legal system and make decisions on women, particularly in relation to the family, to marriage, to divorce, to reproductive rights, to children, and to financial arrangements following divorce, in a way that is antithetical to women's human rights. In these systems, women are not treated as equal, and instead they are treated as subjects, not with full citizenship rights. These are just some of the ways in which that whole shift towards multi-faithism has impacted on progressive struggles, particularly struggles by minority women for rights. So, in conclusion, I would say that as anti-racist, anti-fundamentalist and feminist organisation, we have tried to grapple with these issues at one and the same time. We have tried to grapple with the issues without falling into the trap of you are with us or against us. And that is also the problem of the left, because the left wants to also present in binary terms. If you are not with us, you are against us. And the state is also, if you are not with us, you are against us. We're trying to navigate a course away from that. We want to navigate a course that simultaneously challenges racism, the far right, and the religious right, and patriarchy also from within our communities as well as sexism outside. And of course, none of this is easy to do. I would argue that actually one of the most urgent tasks we face, all of us who see ourselves as progressive, is to build a progressive transnational movements that are capable of challenging globe-spanning systems of power. We have to challenge patriarchy, neoliberalism, nationalism, racism, and religious fundamentalism. Because, as the feminist academic Cynthia Coburn says, they are each other's environment. Each takes account of the other, responds to it, uses it, shapes it, and is used by it. These are all systems that are intersectional, and so we need an intersectional response that is also transnational. The struggle for justice must be the struggle for secular, universal and democratic rights. And I place emphasis on universality and secularism. You know, many people have accused us as black feminists and said, why are you adopting the term secular? Secular is a Western concept. No, it isn't. That's a myth. Secular, universal human rights were fought for by people across the globe. And they were also part of the struggle for independence and against colonialism by many people in the global south. And when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was drafted, it was not just drafted by people in the West. It was also drafted by Indians and Africans and many others. So we have to challenge this idea that secular, universal human rights framework is somehow a Western imperialist construct. It isn't. We have to wrest it away from the reactionary forces and make it our own. The struggle for universal, secular, democratic human rights is the most urgent struggle because there is no other alternative. Any other alternative is not worth, or not, I cannot bear to think about that alternative. We have to fight this and fight it together. Thank you.
Another brilliant, clear presentation. Moving the mic here. And now our last speaker is Roza Hodosan, who is an Hungarian professor, politician, sociologist, member of the Democratic Opposition, and is the founder of the Free Democratic Alliance. Since 1981, she has been editor of the journal AB Independent Publishing House and of the daily newspaper Samizdat. In 1988, she was a founding member of the Free Initiative Network, and between 1990 and 1998, she was a member of Parliament. Thank you.
Do you want to come here? Do you want to come here?
She can do this.
Are you sure?
Yeah, and I need some help in my presentation because I can't.
You can find it?
No. This is okay.
Yes, anche.
Thank you. Hello, good morning everybody. Thank you for your invitation. Excuse me, my English isn't enough to take a lecture. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Good morning everybody. Excuse me, my English isn't enough to speak and presentation in English language. My English will be Hungarian and my translator helped me. But the presentation will be in English language.
Quindi lei parlerà in ungherese e io traduco in italiano. For English, use your headsets.
Az előadásom címe Autokrácia és szexizmus. Engedjék meg, hogy néhány szóban megmagyarázzam, hogy miért választottam ezt a címet, miért leginkább a jelenlegi autokratikus kormány vezetői emblematikus figurái által elhozott idézetek alapján kívánjam bemutatni a magyarországi nők helyzetét, szerepét, hátrányos megkülönböztetését az elszenvedett erőszak formáin.
Il titolo, ho scelto questo titolo Autokrazia e sessismo perché intendo di illustrare la situazione delle donne in Ungheria attraverso la loro posizione sul mercato del lavoro. Io sento.
Non è solo che stai vicino, purtroppo da voce alta.
Quindi cercherò di illustrare la situazione delle donne in Ungheria attraverso citazioni dei leader più emblematici del nostro governo.
A nők munkaerőpiaci helyzete, bérdifferenciái, a karrierpályái követik a közép- és dél-európai trendeket, kivéve a parlamenti helyének számában.
La posizione e la situazione delle donne sul mercato di lavoro, lo stipendio, la differenza dello stipendio femminile e maschile, la professione, la carriera segue il percorso negli altri paesi nell'Europa centrale e nel sud, mentre c'è una bella differenza nella quota rosa in Bologna.
De az autokratikus uralom patriarkális formáját kiépülő Fidesz kormányzó párt a magánéletformák szabadsága, sokszínűsége ellen is Európában példanélküli támadást indított. Ennek az ideológiai és intézményi támadásnak az egyenjogúságukért küzdő nők és mozgalmak a különösen célpontjai.
L'obiettivo di Fidesz è combattere contro tutte le organizzazioni civili e stabilire una forma patriarcale e un governo autocrata.
Milyen rendszer is tulajdonképpen a jelenlegi magyarországi rendszer.
Quindi che regime è attualmente in Ungheria? Non posso.
Metti la cuffia, si sente. Chiedo scusa. Ah, perché nelle cuffie... Allora annunciamo che nelle cuffie si sente in che canale? 1. Canale 1 si sente l'italiano, scusa.
Quindi canale 1, chi non mi sente?
Sì. Il canale 2.
Perché il microfono funziona, io so.
Bastava dirlo, saperlo, funziona.
Lo stesso canale dell'inglese?
Sì, si sente benissimo. Così si sente
Canale
benissimo.
1, canale 1 for Italian, 2 for English.
For English? Channel 2.
Az Orbán rendszer az autokráciáknak egy sajátos formája, alapvető motivációja a hatalomkoncentráció és a személyes családi vagyonfelhalmozás.
Il regime di Orbán rappresenta una forma particolare dell'autocrazia. Il suo obiettivo principale è la concentrazione del potere e l'accumulo del patrimonio privato.
Az uralkodói természete a kibővített nagycsalád mintáit követi, melyet fogadott politikai családnak nevezhetünk.
La natura dell'elite al potere segue come modello le famiglie numerose, che potremmo chiamare anche una famiglia politica adottiva.
Ebben a pater familias, a miniszterelnök, nem formális intézményi felhatalmazás keretein belül kormányoz, hanem ezeken túlnyúlva rendelkezik javak, pozíciók és sorsok felett.
Essa non segue le regole formali ed istituzionali. Il pater familias governa come un sovrano e decide per i beni e le posizioni.
Egy ilyen autokráciában a nők helyzete analóg a patriarkális családon belüli helyzetükkel.
Il ruolo delle donne in un'autocrazia è analogo alla loro situazione all'interno di una famiglia patriarcale.
Orbán célja, hogy a társadalomban felelhető autonóm intézményeket, pozíciókat felszámolja, és a függőség patronus-kliens típusú viszonyaival alakítsa.
Lo scopo di Orbán è quello di distruggere le istituzioni e trasformarle in un rapporto di dipendenza tipo patrono-cliente.
Ez a törekvés nem csak a feminista mozgalmakat veszélyezteti, hanem általában a civil szervezeteket és az akadémia szabadságát is.
Questo obiettivo non mette a rischio solo i movimenti femministi, ma in generale tutte le organizzazioni civili e anche la libertà del mondo accademico.
A kormány bejelentette, hogy a magyar felsőoktatásban bekívánja tiltani a társadalmi nemek diszciplína, a gender studies oktatását. Ez megtörtént a múlt héten.
Il governo ha dichiarato che vuole proibire e poi ha preso anche atto, quindi ha proibito l'insegnamento del gender studies nelle università ungheresi.
A hatalomra került konzervatív Fidesz az új alkotmányban rögtön szükségét érezte a patriarchális családmodell alkotmányban történő rögzítésének.
Quindi appena preso il potere Fidesz, una delle prime cose che ha fatto è inserire nella Costituzione il modello patriarcale.
Így szól az alaptörvényben rögzített szöveg. Magyarország védi a házasság intézményét férfi és nő között önkéntes elhatározás alapján létrejött életközösséget, valamint a családot, mint a nemzet fennmaradásának alapját, a családi kapcsolat alapja a házasság, illetve a szülő-gyermek viszony.
Il testo inserito nella Costituzione, quindi nel 2011, l'Ungheria protegge l'istituzione del matrimonio come unione volontaria tra uomo e donna e la famiglia come base fondamentale per la persistenza della nazione. La base del legame familiare è il matrimonio e il rapporto tra genitori e figli.
Mindeközben 2010 óta a magyar nők relatív helyzete csak romlott.
Nel frattempo la situazione delle donne ungheresi nel mondo è sempre peggiorato.
A világrangsorban 2006-ban Magyarország még az 55. helyen állt.
Mentre nel 2006 eravamo al 55° posto,
2017-ben már a 103. helyre kerültünk.
nel 2017 siamo scesi al 103° posto.
Az európai rangsorban 2017-ben a 44 európai ország közül
Guardando l'Europa, la situazione non è migliore, tra 44 paesi europei
a 43. helyre kerültünk,
siamo al 43° posto,
mögöttünk csak Törökországban.
solo Turchia sta dietro.
A nők valódi esélyegyenlőségét javító normatív törvények, kormányzati lépések helyett a Pater Familias, a miniszterelnök szerződést kíván kötni a hölgyekkel, ladies, a magyar jövőről.
Il nostro premier, il Pater Familiaris, ha deciso di fare un patto, un contratto con le donne.
Bár eddig is tisztelte a nőket, jobban is, mint megérdemlik.
Lui dice che ha sempre rispettato le donne, anche più del dovuto.
A ráadás, hogy ezt összeköti a migránsok elleni xenofób buszítással is.
Ma in più lui ha collegato questo discorso anche con l'odio contro gli immigrati.
Most jöjjenek az idézetek.
Adesso vediamo alcune citazioni.
Maga a miniszterelnök ez év elején
Proprio il nostro primo ministro.
Mindig megadjuk a nőknek kijáró tiszteletet, sőt, többet is, mint
Abbiamo sempre dato il rispetto alle donne, il massimo rispetto alle donne.
Sőt, többet is, mint ami kijár.
Anzi, più del dovuto.
Ez most a migránsok miatt veszélyben van.
Questo ora è a rischio proprio per gli immigrati.
Ugyanez év tavaszán
Lo stesso anno, primavera,
én szeretnék a magyar nőkkel, a magyar hölgyekkel, a hölgy ez egy lekicsinylő szó, kötni egy megállapodást a magyar jövőről, az ő abban játszott szerepükről.
dice che io vorrei fare un patto con le donne ungheresi per quanto riguarda il futuro e al loro ruolo in questo futuro ungherese.
Lássuk is, mi lenne a magyar nők szerepe a jövőben.
Vediamo qual è questa situazione delle donne nel futuro ungherese.
Erről Kövér László, ő a Magyar Országgyűlés elnöke, nyilatkozik.
Sentiamo cosa ha detto László Kövér, portavoce del Parlamento ungherese.
Látszik, hogy ellenállnak a genderőrületnek, hiszen, és itt jön az idézet,
Adesso leggo la citazione.
nem akarjuk a genderőrületet,
Vogliamo stare lontano dall'ideologia folle dei gender.
nem akarjuk Magyarországot a férfi gyűlölő nők és a nőktől rettegő feminin férfiak,
Non vogliamo donne che odiano gli uomini e uomini affeminati e impauriti dalle donne.
és a gyermekekben és családokban csak az önmegvalósítás akadályát látó társadalommá lenni.
E non vogliamo creare una società individualista che vede i bambini e la famiglia solo come un ostacolo dell'autorealizzazione.
Szeretnénk, ha lányaink az önmegvalósítás legmagasabb minőségének azt tartanák, ha unokákat szülhetnének nekünk.
Desideriamo invece che le nostre figlie considerassero la procreazione come un alto livello di autorealizzazione.
A magyar parlamenti képviselőnek aránya 10% jelenleg,
Vediamo le quote, 10% dei parlamentari ungheresi sono donne,
a világban 23%,
mentre nel mondo in generale sono 23%.
ezzel mi a 159. helyen állunk a világban.
L'Ungheria quindi è al 159° posto tra i vari paesi.
A magyar kormányban egy női miniszter van,
Tra i ministri c'è una donna,
Budapest 23 kerületi polgármesteréből egy nő van,
tra i 23 sindaci a Budapest c'è una sola donna,
a fővárosi közgyűlés 33 tagjából 3 nő van,
mentre tra i 33 consiglieri comunali sono 3 donne a Budapest.
Az akadémikusok 7%-a nő.
Il 7% dei membri dell'Accademia Nazionale sono donne.
És amikor egy éppen pozícióba került nőt leváltanak, a miniszter...
Quando, per esempio, un altro esempio di Viktor Orbán, quando hanno mandato via una donna da un incarico,
amikor leváltják, akkor ezt mondja.
Lui ha detto, e cito parole sue,
nőügyekkel nem foglalkozom.
Non mi interessano le questioni sulle donne.
Ezt mondotta a magyarországi a magyarországi washingtoni nagykövet leváltásán okán egy újságírónak.
Lui, questa era la sua risposta a una giornalista riguardo la questione dell'allontanamento di Rika Semerkinyi, ambasciatrice dell'Ungheria a Washington.
Bár eddig számos esetben történt kísérlet Magyarországon a női kvóta bevezetésére,
hanno già fatto vari tentativi nel Parlamento di introdurre le quote rose.
2007-ben a liberális párt, 2011-ben egy zöld párt.
Nel 2007 un partito liberale e nel 2011 un partito dei Verdi.
Majd egy civil szervezet a Nők a pályán népszavazási kampányt kezdeményezett. Most ennek a plakátjait
Quello che vedete qui sono i manifesti per un referendum di un'organizzazione civile.
Ez egy nagyon jellegzetes és érdekes kampány volt, szakítani akart azzal a sztereotípiával, ahol a nők vetkőznek, a férfiak karriert építenek.
Era una cosa molto interessante e simpatica e voleva spogliare gli uomini in questo caso e non le donne.
Híres magyar tudósok, újságírók, színészek,
personaggi famosi ungheresi della scienza o attori
álltak ennek a kampány mögé. Itt ezen a képen éppen Heller Ágnes, híres magyar filozófust látják, egy magyar
nella prima foto c'è Ágnes Heller, nota filosofa ungherese.
És az a könyv, amit épp oda tart, az a reneszánsz Heller, és a reneszánsz ember.
Quella posizione è l'uomo rinascimentale.
Ennek ellenére, hogy igen jellegzetes kampányképeink voltak, a népszavazás sem vezetett sikerre.
Nonostante queste idee brillanti, purtroppo il referendum non ha portato risultati.
Lássuk is, hogy a magyar parlamentben hogy is adják meg a tiszteletet a női képviselőtársaknak, sőt, még többet is, mint amit megérdemelnek.
Vediamo allora nei dettagli come vengono rispettate le donne nel Parlamento.
Orbán Viktor akkor még csak elnök volt, Dávid Ibolyának a másik konzervatív párt elnökének mondta egy parlamenti vitában.
Allora, all'epoca Orbán Viktor era solo presidente, nel 2009 quando ha detto a Ibolya Dávid, un altro presidente di un altro partito.
Sose voltam még ilyen helyzetben, mindig én kértem meg a hölgyek kezét, még olyan nem volt, aki rám akarta volna magát erőltetni.
Quindi disse a lei, non mi è mai capitata una situazione simile, sono stato sempre io a chiedere la mano delle donne, non mi è mai capitato una che voleva imporsi su di me.
Wow. Illés Zoltán, környezetvédelmi államtitkár, kormányzó párt.
Invece Zoltán Illés, sottosegretario della tutela dell'ambiente.
Egy parlamenti kérdésre adott válaszában egy zöld párti képviselőnőnek ezt mondotta.
La risposta in Parlamento all'intervento di Bernadette Seer, un altro membro del Parlamento.
Mosolyogva kell visszautasítanom azt a sok butaságot és baromságot, amit ön itt elmondott. Attól, hogy ön szép, még nem következik, hogy ön okos is.
Dice, mi fanno sorridere e devo rifiutare tutte le stupidaggini ed idiozie da lei riportate. Il fatto che lei è bella non significa che è anche intelligente.
Egy Késő esti parlamenti vitában Vadai Ágnesnek, ellenzéki képviselőnek egy kormánypárti megjegyzése: vetkőzági hol a bébitől.
Stessa persona alla fine di un lungo dibattito notturno un commento a un deputato Ágnes Forlì del governo: spogliati aghi dove i babydor.
Egy Zagyva Gyula, egy szélsőjobboldali országgyűlési képviselő mondotta Osztolykáni Ágnesnek a következőt.
Un altro deputato, Gyula Zagyva, estrema destra, dice a Ágnes Osztolykan, a un altro deputato: non mi importa, questa è non mi importa che sei una zingara, una botta te la dai.
Kovács Zoltán, ő a kormány szóvivője.
Zoltán Kovács, portavoce del governo.
Ágnes egy Twitter bejegyzésében írta,
Ha scritto in inglese su Twitter:
Agnes Heller is just old, bigot and outdated communist.
Agnes Heller is just an old, bigot and outdated communist.
A nőknek gyermekeket, unokákat szülni nem csak hazafias kötelesség, hanem geopolitikai feladatuk is, hiszen, és itt az idézet, azért a világ, aki teleszüli.
Come abbiamo detto, quindi le donne ungheresi devono dare figli e quindi hanno proprio un ruolo nel mondo di geopolitica.
Ezt Németh Szilárd, a kormányzópárt alelnöke, egy időben szóvivője mondotta.
Szilárd Németh, vicepresidente in un'epoca anche portavoce di Fidesz, diceva:
Azt lehet látni, hogy micsoda súlya van ennek a kijelentésnek, hiszen Magyarországot ezen a térképen nem igazán lehet megtalálni a néprasségarányos térképen, tehát ez nem sikerült még.
Quindi lui diceva: il mondo è di coloro che riescono a popolarlo, ma vedendo l'Ungheria un puntino minuscolo, credo che ha portato grande risultato.
Akiknek nincsenek gyermekei, ők nem lehetnek tisztességes politikusok.
Quindi la comunicazione ufficiale è quello che chi non ha figli non può essere un bravo politico.
A Fidesz Brüsszel és nemzetközi bírárói elleni harcában nem véletlenül jelenik meg a lejárató érvként a gyermektelenség.
Quindi essere senza figli fa parte della loro propaganda.
Hoppá Péter országgyűlési volt kulturális államtitkár megosztása a Facebookon, miután az Európai Parlament elfogadta a magyar kormánybíráló Sargentini jelentést.
Quello che vedete sullo slide è il post di Peter Hoppal, deputato ex sottosegretario della cultura di Fidesz, che ha messo su Facebook dopo che il Parlamento europeo ha approvato il rapporto Sargentini che critica il governo ungherese.
Nekik nem számít a jövő, a haza, Európa, a keresztény kultúra, csak a carpe diem. Ennyi.
È stato postato con il commento: per loro non conta il futuro, la patria, l'Europa, il cristianesimo, solo il carpe diem.
Minden képhez magyarul oda van téve, ami megjelent a Twitteren, hogy nincs gyermeke. Tehát az összes politikusnál oda van téve, aki itt ezen a képen van,
Sotto ogni
nincs gyermeke.
fotografia c'è scritto senza figli, senza figli.
De a miniszterelnökünk egy lovagias ember, még ha ez a patriarchális lovagiasság sértő, tiltott, illetve lekicsinyő is.
Anche noi abbiamo un premier cavalleresco, anche se questo non sempre è un fatto positivo.
Orbán Viktor kézcsókot akart adni Sonia Gandhinak, a pártelnök asszony azonban elrántotta a kezét.
Vediamo alcuni esempi poco riusciti. La prima fotografia, Viktor Orbán tenta di baciare le mani a Sonia Gandhi, ma lei si tira indietro.
Egy hölgy érkezik Magyarországra, ezért nem ragaszkodunk semmihez.
mentre la seconda foto, sta arrivando una donna in Ungheria, quindi non insistiamo troppo.
Mondta Orbán Viktor arra a kérdésre, hogy milyen témákat akar felvetni Magyarországra érkező Angela Merkel német kancellárral.
Questa era la risposta di Viktor Orbán alla domanda di quali argomenti vorrebbe discutere con la cancelliere tedesca Angela Merkel durante la sua visita in Ungheria.
Persze nem csak kezet csókolni tudunk a nőknek, a családon belül erőszakról is valójában ők maguk a nők tehetnek.
Ma non parliamo solo baciare le mani, anche le violenze in famiglia domestiche sono colpa delle donne, sarebbero colpa delle donne.
Idézetek jönnek, amelyek, higgyék el, nem ritkán hangzanak el, rendszeresen elhangzanak, csak néhányat próbáltam kiválasztani.
Altre citazioni, credetemi, questi casi capitano molto spesso in realtà.
Varga István kormányzópárti képviselő, ha mindenki a 2, 3 vagy 4 gyermekét megszüli, és eleget ad a hazának, és mindenki boldog lesz, ezt követően mindenki megvalósíthatja saját magát.
István Varga, deputato, Fidesz, 2012, se ognuno partorisce 2, 3 o 4 figli per l'onore della patria, tutti si sentiranno felici e possono autorealizzarsi.
Azzal kellene foglalkozni, hogy ebben a társadalomban ne 1 vagy 2 gyermek szülessen, hanem 3, 4 vagy 5 gyermek.
Dovremmo occuparci della questione di fare 3, 4 o 5 figli per famiglia e non solo 1 o 2.
És akkor lenne értelme annak, hogy jobban megbecsülnénk egymást, és fel sem merülhetne a családon belüli erőszak.
Allora si acquisirebbe una stima reciproca e non capiterebbero casi di violenza in famiglia.
Ő például 2008-ban megkapta a Magyar Érdemrend-tiszti keresztjét.
Questa persona nel 2018 riceve la medaglia al merito della Repubblica d'Ungheria.
Balog József, ez egy idézett vakkomondor polgármester Fülöpházán.
Un altro personaggio, József Balog, che è soprannominato come il cane cieco, è sindaco di un paesino in Ungheria.
Egy bírósági ítéletből idézek.
Leggo una sentenza tribunale.
Az élettársa fiának a lagziáról érkeztek haza, amikor Balog részegen és gyógyszer hatása alatt legalább 2-szer ököllel a közepesnél erősebb ütést mért a nő arcára.
Stavano tornando a casa dal matrimonio del figlio della sua compagna, quando Balog, ubriaco e sotto l'effetto di farmaci, ha colpito almeno 2 volte il viso della donna con una forza più potente della media.
Az asszony darabos orcsontörést és jobboldali járomcsont többszörös törését szenvedte el, véres arccal és ruhában hajnalban menekült a faluba segítségért.
La donna ha subito frattura composta delle ossa nasali e dell'osso zigomatico destro, è scappato in paese con il viso e il vestito insanguinato per chiedere aiuto.
A sérülései 4-6 hét alatt gyógyultak csak meg.
Il tempo di guarigione era 4-6 settimane.
A bíróság pénzbüntetésre ítélte, a Fidesz nem járt el ellene, 2014-ben újra választották.
Da notare che il Tribunale ha rilasciato una sanzione pecuniaria, il Fidesz non ha avviato alcun procedimento e soprattutto che nel 2014 è stato rieletto.
Nem csak a családon belüli erőszakról, de még a hajléktalanságról is a nők tehetnek.
Solo la violenza domestica colpa delle donne, anche i senza tetti.
Lukács Tamás, ő kereszténydemokrata képviselő, a Fidesz koalíciós partnere egy parlamenti felszólalásban.
Come dice Tomás Lukács, deputato di un partito che è in coalizione con Fidesz,
bátorkodtam elmenni egy hajléktalan szállóba, ahol 10 férfi közül 8-nak a története úgy kezdődött, hogy amikor elváltam. Ezért senki nem felelős?
Dice in un intervento in Parlamento: ho visitato un centro dei senza tetti dove la storia di 8 uomini su 10 è iniziata con un divorzio. Dove sono i responsabili?
Mindeközben Éppen ebben a hónapban Magyarország példátlan intézkedést kezdett a hajléktalanok ellen, kriminalizálja a hajléktalanokat.
Proprio in questi giorni in Ungheria ci sono i nuovi provvedimenti contro i senza tetti, sembra un atto criminale.
Alkotmányban rögzítette, hogy az utcán való élés üldözendő cselekmény, és ezért figyelmeztetések után kriminalizálják és börtönbe zárják a hajléktalanokat.
E quindi hanno messo anche in Costituzione il divieto di vivere sulla strada, sembra un atto criminale e possono anche metterli in prigione.
Hát a hagyományos női szerepeket korán meg kell tanítani a gyerekeknek, hiszen szellemi képességeik is gyengébbek a férfiakénál.
Sembra che l'insegnamento bisogna iniziare all'età piccola, i ruoli femminili, che le donne sono, la capacità intellettuale delle donne sono inferiori.
Egy példát hozhattam volna többet is.
Abbiamo tanti esempi, io adesso ho portato solo uno.
Ez az oktatási hatóságok által a szabad tankönyvpiac felszámolása után,
Dopo che l'autorità ha eliminato il mercato libero dei testi scolastici,
egy negyedik osztályos diákoknak írt tankönyvben az alábbi vicc lelhető fel, a patriarchális családi szerepeket és a nőknek abban szánt szerepét érzékeltető ideológiára.
in un libro redatto per le quarte elementari troviamo la seguente battuta con riferimenti evidenti al ruolo femminile all'interno della famiglia patriarcale.
Pistike áthívja a barátját a szomszédból, már egy ideje játszanak, amikor megkérdezi a kis vendég Pistikétől.
Stefano invita a casa sua il suo amichetto. Stanno giocando da un pezzo quando l'amichetto domanda a Stefano:
Te, mi ez a nagy kiabálás a másik szobában?
ma che cosa sono queste urla nell'altra stanza?
Ja, nem érdekes, csak az apám próbálja megértetni anyámmal a házi feladatomat.
Ah, non ti preoccupare, niente di importante, è solo mio padre che cerca di spiegare i miei compiti a mia madre.
Ha pedig van tudomány, a gender studies, ami a nők társadalmi helyzetével foglalkozik, és szembeszáll a patriarchális világnézettel, akkor érvek helyett egyszerűbb magát a tudományágat kommunista áltudománynak nevezni és betiltani annak oktatását.
Sembra che esiste una disciplina che potrebbe contrastare questa visione patriarcale, ma allora subito è facile dire che non è una scienza, vietiamo l'istruzione.
Ez megtörtént a múlt héten.
Quello che abbiamo già detto, infatti è successo.
Forlì István Fidesz szóvivője, a gender elmélet szembe megy az Isten által teremtett világ törvényeivel és az emberi természettel.
Perché secondo loro la teoria dei gender è contro la natura dell'uomo e del Dio.
Sokan szándékosan összekeverik a társadalmi szerepeket a liberálisok által kreált társadalmi nemekkel. Előbbi tudományos kutatása szükséges, a jelenleg is zajlik több tudományi karon.
Molti volutamente mescolano i ruoli sociali con i gender creati dai liberali. La ricerca scientifica dei ruoli sociali è fondamentale e si svolge in varie facoltà di scienze sociali.
Rétvári Bence, ő a Humán Erőforrások Minisztériumának államtitkára,
mentre Bence Rétvári, sottosegretario del Ministero di Risorse Umane,
a gender a marxizmus-leninizmushoz hasonlóan inkább nevezhető ideológiának, mint tudománynak, így kétséges, elérje az egyetemi oktatási szintet. A szaktartalma szemben áll mindazzal, amit a kormány értékvilágra az emberről vall.
Dichiara che il gender, analogicamente al marxismo e al leninismo, può essere considerato più un'ideologia che una scienza. Quindi è improbabile che raggiunga il livello di una disciplina all'università. Il contenuto della materia è al contrario dell'ordine dei valori rappresentato dal governo.
Kövér László, ő továbbra is a parlament elnöke.
László Kövér, presidente del Parlamento.
Amikor elmegyünk olyan szélsőségig, mint a gender tudományoknak a hivatalos oktatás keretei közé történő beiktatása, akkor azt gondolom, hogy fel kell lépni.
Quando arriviamo ai punti estremi, come l'introduzione della scienza dei gender nel programma educativo nazionale, allora penso che uno deve agire.
Ugyanis, hogy azt, amit genderizmus néven is összefoglalóan alkalmaznak itt néhányan tudományként próbálnak meg feltüntetni, az egyrészt ideológia, másrészt pedig olyan fajta emberkísérletnek a szellemi megalapozása, ami semmivel sem jobb, mint az eugenetika a náci időkben.
Dunque, quello che alcuni chiamano genderismo e cercano di far passare come scienza è non solo un'ideologia, ma anche costituisce la base teorica di una ricerca sulla specie umana che non è per niente meglio dell'eugenetica ai tempi dei nazisti.
Ráadásul nincs is szükség szerintük az ott szerzett tudásra, semmilyen zöld, ő miniszterelnök helyettes.
Loro dicono che non abbiamo bisogno di questa conoscenza.
Senki nem akar genderológust foglalkoztatni, következésképpen képezni sem kell őket.
Come dichiara Joel Shemin, vicepremier di un partito in coalizione, nessuno vuole assumere un genderologo, di conseguenza non abbiamo bisogno di formarli. Fodor Éva, rektor helyettes CEU, aki a CEU a Közép-Európai Egyetem, akit éppen tegnap üldöztek el véglegesen Budapestről. Eva Fodor, vicerettore della famosa Università CEU in Ungheria, che proprio ieri hanno cacciato via dall'Ungheria.
Ő nyilatkozik erről, elítéli a Gender Studies programokat érő jelenlegi magyarországi alaptalan támadásokat.
Lei dichiara che la CEU rifiuta le critiche ungheresi del suo programma di Gender Studies.
A Gender Studies egy nemzetközileg is elismert tudományág, mely releváns elméleti és társadalmi tudást hoz létre, és amelyet évtizedek óta tanítanak az egyetemünkön.
Il Gender Studies è una disciplina della scienza riconosciuta a livello internazionale che crea conoscenza teorica e sociale rilevante.
Végzős diákjaink az ábra is ezt mutatja, kiugróan sikeresen helyezkednek el a nemzetközi munkaerőpiacon.
I nostri ex studenti hanno trovato il loro posto nel mercato del lavoro internazionale.
A program megszüntetése nagy veszteséget jelentene a magyar tudományos közösségnek, és tovább korlátozna a tudományos kutatás szabadságát. A CEU elkötelezett a Gender Studies program további oktatása mellett.
E la chiusura del programma rappresenterebbe una perdita notevole per la comunità scientifica e restringerebbe la libertà degli studi scientifici. La CEU è determinata di proseguire il programma Gender Studies.
Tegnaptól nem lesz módja Gender Studies vagy bármit oktatni, tegnap véglegesen eldőlt, hogy a Közép-Európai Egyetemnek el kell hagynia Magyarországot.
Ma ieri hanno avuto la notizia definitivamente devono chiudere.
De a magyar kormány nemzetközi szinten is folytatja harcát a patriarchális családmodell védelméért és ellenáll a nemzetközi nyomásnak.
Il governo comunque sta lottando e resiste alla pressione internazionale.
Ezt mutatja, hogy az Európa Tanácsban a nők elleni és a családon belüli erőszakkal szemben megalkotott átfogó nemzetközi egyezményhez való csatlakozás lehetőségét Isztambulban megnyitották 2011-ben, ez az úgynevezett isztambuli egyezmény.
Un altro esempio, come conoscete la Convenzione di Istanbul, nel 2011 il Consiglio europeo ha chiesto l'adesione a questa convenzione sulla prevenzione e la lotta alla violenza contro le donne e la violenza domestica.
Bár Magyarország csatlakozott az egyezményhez, a Fidesz többségű magyar parlament azóta sem volt hajlandó ratifikálni ezt az egyezményt, és szerintem nem is fogja jövőben sem.
L'Ungheria ha dato l'adesione, ma il Parlamento con maggioranza di Fidesz non ha mai ratificato la convenzione. E lei aggiunge che credo che non lo farà mai.
Most nem régen a Fidesz egyetlen EP képviselője sem szavazta meg az Európai Parlament plenáris ülésen a Nők Jogai és Egyenlőség Bizottságnak, a FEM-nek a jelentését.
Come abbiamo visto di recente, nessun voto di Fidesz sulla sessione plenaria del Parlamento europeo per il report della Commissione per i diritti della donna e l'uguaglianza di genere FEM.
Melyet az Európa Parlament 91%-os többséggel fogadott el, és amely cselekvésre szólítja fel az EU intézményeit a munkahelyeken, a nyilvános térben, illetve a politikai életben elkövetett megfélemlítés és szexuális zaklatás ellen.
Accettato il Parlamento europeo con il 91% dei voti, che richiama l'attenzione verso l'abuso e molestie sessuali sui luoghi di lavoro, spazi pubblici nella politica.
Talán ennyi elég is annak bemutatására, hogy összenő, ami összetartozik. Ez magyarul azt jelenti, hogy minden rossz együtt jár. Ez nem egy pozitív kicsengésű nálunk.
Credo che è stato sufficiente dimostrare ciò che si appartiene crescerà insieme. Questa frase in Ungheria è molto negativa e vuol dire che con un male arrivano tanti altri.
A patriarchális család uralmi mintáit követő autokratikus rendszert nem csak a szexizmus jellemzi, hanem a rasszizmus, a xenofóbia és a homofóbia is.
Il sistema autocrata, il regime, che segue come modello la famiglia patriarcale, contraddistingue non solo il sessismo, ma anche il razzismo, xenofobia e omofobia.
Köszönöm, hogy meghallgattak.
Thank you. I think we have 10 minutes for some questions. Thank you for another depressing. Unfortunately, it's very depressing. Very depressing. Yes.
Posso parlare così tanto credo che mi senta.
Per gli interpreti che devono tradurre. Grazie. Questo non funziona. This is not.
Io faccio solo due osservazioni che vorrei mi sono venute in mente. Prima di tutto capisco perfettamente la collega che abita nella Gran Bretagna, perché anche noi in Germania abbiamo alcuni casi di cosiddetta tolleranza repressiva in cui si ammette che per esempio le bambine scolare di provenienza musulmana non facciano la lezione di nuoto in piscina perché i genitori non vogliono, cose del genere. Quindi queste sono cose che non dovrebbero secondo noi assolutamente avvenire, quindi non è che capita solo lì. Questa è una cosa. L'altra cosa è che secondo me noi in Italia non ci possiamo sentire estremamente superiori ad altri paesi, dato che abbiamo ancora oggi l'articolo 37 che data dal 1948, in cui si dice testualmente che l'organizzazione del lavoro di una donna deve permetterle di esercitare la sua essenziale funzione familiare, non riproduttiva. Quindi se ne esonerano gli uomini che non hanno nessun obbligo di assolvere a dei compiti familiari e quindi le donne sono automaticamente un rischio per ogni datore di lavoro. E infatti la statistica delle donne che sono ufficialmente occupate in Italia è bassa. Mi pare che solo il Piemonte abbia una media più o meno vicina a quella europea. Questo è un problema assolutamente comune, è un problema che richiede un'organizzazione sociale completamente diversa e io capisco che agli uomini non piaccia un'organizzazione sociale completamente diversa perché è chiaro. E quindi io vorrei sapere intanto quali percentuali, quali dati statistici di natalità ci sono in Ungheria, in Bologna, in Inghilterra, in Germania oggi c'è 1,59 bambini a donna feconda e noi faremo a febbraio un convegno sulla conciliazione tra famiglia e professione in paragone Italia e Germania. La statistica tedesca non permette un ricambio generazionale, però è diventata migliore e pare soprattutto tra le donne laureate da quando le nostre leggi, le leggi in Germania sono cambiate perché se il comune non procura un posto asilo nido alle donne che lavorano possono essere denunciati e dovrebbero pagare il guadagno perduto, per esempio. E infatti si stanno attivando, gli asili nidi stanno crescendo in continuazione. Quindi senza un'organizzazione sociale che preveda compiti familiari ugualmente portati avanti da tutti e due, a me non sembra che assolutamente cambierà mai nulla.
Forse il filo non arriva, vediamo. Sì.
Buongiorno, vorrei sapere perché in Ungheria, non so se ho capito bene, fare più figli ridurrebbe la violenza domestica. Non so, non mi è chiaro questo punto, ho capito male io, vorrei capire meglio.
Il governo vorrei dire. Rosanna?
Who wants to start with maybe on the Hungary question? You want to start with the other?
Okay. I would like to speak Hungarian so they can. Okay. Szerintem nem csökkenteni természetesen, de a kormánypárti képviselők így gondolkodnak róla.
Ovviamente sono d'accordo che non ridurrà la violenza domestica, però ho portato come esempio che loro ragionano in questo modo.
Cioè, non riesco a capire il nesso, comunque.
Non solo tu.
Noi pure non riusciamo a capire, ma loro sono convinti.
Un discorso fuori da ogni grazie, da ogni comprensione, grazie.
Do you want to answer about the mentality question? Do you want to start with the mentality?
As I understand, there is not that many questions anymore.
Well, there was one about the mentality rate.
About what?
Natality
Birth rates.
Birth
There were two
rates.
questions. One was what she said about Germany, and
Yeah.
which I want to reply, and then the birth rates.
About birth.
Well, I didn't get the question. I'm sorry. I was struggling with this equipment. So what was the question?
I dati statistici di natalità.
In Poland?
Yes, birth rates. Birth rates in Poland.
In Poland, actually, there are very low fertility rates. It's 1.23, which of course feeds this nationalistic discourse and actually pushed the government to introduce some financial allowances in order to increase the birth fertility. However, it seems it doesn't work that way. So although women are receiving allowance for every child they have, the birth fertility rate remains in the same level.
I don't have numbers offhand in terms of birth rates in the UK, but what I can tell you is that there is a general aging population that is now the situation, I think, not just in the UK, but possibly in other parts of, well, I know in other parts of Europe too. So we're having a very aging population. Where there is an increase in population is within the new migrant communities, the minorities, which of course the far right is using to its advantage. So that's in relation to the issue about birth rate. And I think it's going to it's a ticking bomb in terms of the aging populations and the short-sightedness of governments in relation to immigration issues, actually, because we live in a globalized context. There's the idea of external borders and borders is just going to create, it's not dealing with actually needs. Europe will need a young population, and where it's going to come from is a question. You're right about the fact that, you know, what I described about the ways in which women are particularly subjugated as a result of the rise of fundamentalism in minority communities, including, you know, Muslim girls, is not just something that in the UK, but you're seeing it in other parts of Europe, perhaps in Germany. The point I would make is this. What we're talking about is that in the 70s and 80s, minority girls were not excluded from education. They were not excluded from dance, from music, from sports on the basis of their religion. Of course there were conservative families and there were traditional families, and so there were always contestations going on, particularly between the younger generation girls and their mothers and their parents for more freedoms. But what is so different now is that it is a particular political ideology that says that girls should not be exposed. In this case, it's this ideology exported by Saudi Arabia particularly, but also the Muslim Brotherhood, and also from Indian subcontinent itself, which insists on a particular patriarchal sort of role for women and girls, and which is to basically segregate them, metaphorically speaking, but also literally speaking. So what we're seeing is a rise of an ideology, and with the rise of an ideology, more and more restrictions on girls. Because Islam has a tradition of music, it has a tradition of liberal tolerance and even progressive values, but that is not the Islam that is being promoted. The one that is being promoted is a fundamentalist notion. And what we're seeing is that the same restrictions are then also present, are also echoed in other fundamentalist ideologies. Essentially, they are built on very patriarchal orders. So fundamentalists are insisting that their religion demands that women and young girls are not subject to music, don't partake in dance, don't partake in sports, don't even have careers outside the home, and so on and so forth. But this is a reinvention. It is not, they claim it to be authentic religious values, but actually it's a very political agenda that they're imposing. and that needs to be understood. At the same time, we have to be wary of the way the far right will also use this to target minorities as part of a racist discourse. So at the same time as challenging the patriarchy of fundamentalists, we are also having to challenge the far right for using and instrumentalizing, as Wanda talked about in her presentation, instrumentalizing these issues, these women and their roles, as a way of furthering an anti-immigration agenda. So one has to be really careful on both sides.
Magyarországon jelenleg a születési ráta 1,4%.
In Ungheria attualmente questo valore è 1,4.
Folyamatosan csökken, sőt az elmúlt évekre egyre drasztikusabban.
Però è sempre di meno, diminuisce drasticamente negli ultimi anni.
A kormány ugyan szlogenje az Isten haza család, és családbarát kormánynak mutatja magát.
Nonostante che il motto del governo, che loro sono l'amico della famiglia, un governo per la famiglia,
de nincsenek valódi intézkedései, sőt olyan intézkedései vannak, ami nagyszámú elvándorlást idézett elő Magyarországon, 500 000 fiatal hagyta el az országot, minden 6. gyerek külföldön születik.
Ma non ci sono misure vere, anzi negli ultimi anni mezzo milione di giovani hanno lasciato il paese e ogni sesto ungherese nasce all'estero.
A redistribúció során pedig kifejezetten csak a gazdag munkavállaló családoknak tud családi adókedvezményt adni. 2008 óta semmit nem változott a családi pótlék, a gyermekkedvezmények értéke, számban is ugyanannyi, miközben azóta hatalmas infláció volt.
E anche si puntano molto sulla tasse favorevole per le famiglie, in realtà anche questo favorisce le famiglie più benestanti, e dal 2008 perché non sono stati cambiati i sistemi di redistribuzione per vari sussidi e aiuti alle famiglie.
Okay, I think we don't have much time, so for like a final comment from the board.
I have very brief 2 comments at the end of our meeting. One is a bitter observation which is related to very famous slogan used so far by progressive movements, including globalist, which says another world is possible, meaning that we are hoping for a better world. However, now this slogan can have also another meaning, which is another world which is not necessarily the better one, but the worst one is possible. So I think we should be doing everything not to allow this to happen. And in the very end, on more positive note, I would like to mention something which some of you might have heard. Yesterday, the European Parliament has adopted a resolution which in fact was proposed by the Polish female MEP member of the European Parliament. It was a resolution to call for action against all these movements, racist and anti-neonazis and all xenophobias. So this resolution, which is quite strong, has been adopted. Resolution, it's not a binding document, it's just like a political statement, but still it's very important. And although not every members of the European Parliament, as you can guess, have voted in favor of it, it's still a good sign that it seems that at the European level, political institutions are have understood that what we are now dealing with in different countries has is having a great risk of for all of us living in Europe. So let's hope this resolution is going to come into force. Thank you.
Do you want to say something? Okay. On this note, then, on this slightly more positive note, I would like to thank you all for your participation, and you as well. And thank you again. Thank you.